Hello everyone, and welcome back to another election analysis video. And today, we're going to be going over independent RFK Jr.'s suspension of his presidential campaign and what effect that and his endorsement of Republican candidate Donald Trump will be on Trump's chances of victory come this November when he goes against Kamala in the presidential election. And now I have this map laid out here, and we're going to go through the swing states' individual polls one by one and guesstimating the vote share that RFK supporters will give Trump and whether or not it'll give him an edge over Harris in the election. So first, let's go over why we're having this conversation. Many people are thinking that this isn't a big deal, RFK dropping out and endorsing Trump. And if we can see here that the head of the election model at 538, we can see him saying that this isn't really shifting the election. It's only helping out Trump by 0.2% in their popular vote share margin. But the reality is that I feel like that's misleading, because if we look at the election, this election could honestly come down to a few key swing states and just a margin of 1,000 votes between them. So any edge a candidate can get over the other and could be a game changer. So now let's go to this article from The Independent. The Independent is showing us how RFK supporters are more likely to be Republican than Democrat. And we can see later here that around 6 or 10% of them will abstain from voting. And I'll take this into account as we fill out the map. But as much as I'm paying attention to this article, The Independent isn't as credible of a source compared to something such as Pew Research, which is another article I'm looking at here. And we can see here in Pew Research that RFK voters are more Republican leaning than Democrat leaning. So as I fill out the map, I'm going to assume that around 2/3 of Kennedy supporters are going to vote for Trump over Harris. And the reason why I chose around 60% or 2/3 is because it looks like Republicans take up around 70% of Kennedy's vote share, but taking into account voters who will stay at home, I'm only going to assume that they're going to turn out for Kennedy around 60% or 2/3. So now let's go to the map and start filling out the states one by one. So first, let's go to the state of Georgia. And in 538's polling, Trump already leads Harris, so I don't think there's really a question about who's going to win that state, at least as of right now, especially given the fact that Trump has historically outperformed the polls there and Republicans won the elections there in the midterms. But now let's go to North Carolina. In 538, even though Harris is slightly leading Trump in the polling, I still am going to give it to Trump in this model because in 538's own election model, they have Trump winning the state, albeit barely, but still, I'm going to give it to Trump in the model, regardless of what Kennedy's effect on the vote share will be. So now let's go to Democratic leading states, and first is Michigan. And if we look at the polls here, we can see that on 538's polling model, Harris is leading Trump by around 3.3%, and Kennedy's vote share in Michigan is around 4.6%. So assuming Trump gets around 2/3 of those voters, and 2/3 of 4.6% is around 3.2%. The reality of the situation is that even if Trump is able to get that much, he's not going to be able to flip the state. And I still think much less than 3.2% is going to turn out for Trump. I think many more voters than that are going to stay at home. So I don't think Trump is going to be able to make up such a wide margin and take Michigan from Harris. I do expect it to get closer, but I still expect Michigan to go to Harris. And next we have Wisconsin. And Wisconsin has an even larger margin of victory for Harris over Trump with an even smaller vote share. So for similar reasons, I'm going to give Michigan to Harris, and even though I think Trump is going to slightly close the gap there compared to Michigan. And now we go to Nevada. And if we go to 538's polling, we can see that Harris is barely beating Trump in the state of Nevada by around 0.7%. And if we look at Kennedy's vote share there, he had around 5% or just under that, and 2/3 of 5% is 3.33%. And even if only like 1/3 of that 3.3% turns out to vote for Trump over Harris, Trump is still going to be able to make up that margin and take the state. So in my election forecast, I have Trump taking Nevada over Harris because I do think, especially with RFK's endorsement, he'll be able to take Nevada from Harris. And now we go to Arizona, and this one's going to be tough because there's a lot of different factors to take into account. But if we look at the polls here, according to 538, we can see that Harris has around 1.1/3 edge over Trump. And if we look at Kennedy's vote share here in Arizona, Kennedy was polling at around 5%. And like I said before, 2/3 of a 5% vote share is 3.33%. And even if less than half of those 3.3% of supporters turn out to vote, Trump is still going to be able to make up that 1.3% margin. And that's why I give the state of Arizona to him as well. And now we have the most important state of all, Pennsylvania, the tipping point state. And first, let's go to the polls here in 538, and we can see that Harris is leading Trump by around 1.8%, a narrow but a wider margin than that Trump would like. And we could see Kennedy supporters polling at around 4% or just under that here in 538's polling model. So assuming that 2/3 of Kennedy supporters turn out for Trump, we can bet that around 2.6% of Kennedy supporters will go to Trump, which will allow him to fill up the gap between him and Harris. And even if around 30% of Kennedy supporters don't show up to vote and vote for Trump, Trump is still going to be able to make it that margin, which is why I think barely he takes Pennsylvania over Harris. So there you guys have it. Here's my updated presidential map prediction in the wake of RFK's presidential campaign suspension, and I currently have it at 287 to 251 in favor of Donald Trump. And look, I know someone's gonna watch this and call me biased and say something stupid like, "Oh my god, you're such a Republican hack." And to that I say, well, one, that's certainly not true, and two, I'm literally just using numbers and data to guesstimate the amount of support Trump will gain after a candidate dropped out and gave him a major endorsement. So there you guys have it. Thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you guys later.